Okay, so I'm going to show you how to get your terrain into Unity from your Course Terrain Tool export. So you should have, at this point, your Unity project template with sort of an empty scene open and created and ready to go. And then have your Course Terrain Tool export folder ready to go as well. In there, you're going to find two sort of text files, a CSV and a TXT. Open whichever you prefer, and you should see some stats about your course terrain export. So we see our terrain size in meters, and we see a min-max and then a height. And the two numbers we really want to focus on here are the size in meters and the height in meters. We're going to basically create a terrain object in Unity with those values. So I'm going to remember 2250 as I come back to Unity, and I'm going to right click, go to 3D object, and go to terrain. And I'm just going to rename this like course terrain. And then save the project. I like to save often in Unity. So next thing we're going to do is make sure the terrain is selected, come over to the settings in the inspector here for the terrain, and then scroll down a little bit and you'll see a section called mesh resolution. And what you're going to want to do is punch in the size from your text file, which if you remember is 2250. So select that again. So come down here, 2250, and then the same for the length, 2250. And then for the height, we're going to want that value, again, for the inner height is 20.391. So let's punch in 20.391. And then I like to, want to increase the height map resolution to 4097 by 4097. So we get the highest resolution possible, and that's actually what our Course Terrain Tool export uses. So now we're basically, I forgot one more step. Sort of optional, but I like to do it because it makes things a little bit easier, is offset the X and the Y of your terrain to half the width and the height. In my case, I think that's, if I'm doing math in my head, 1125. Or I'm sorry, negative 1125, and then negative 1125. Let me check the math on that before I continue here. 2050. Yep, I think that's right. Okay. So now, if I zoom around my scene, I have a flat terrain that's centered in my scene. That's what the negative half does. It offsets it so that the center of the terrain is now in the center of my scene. And you can see, based on where my light and my camera and stuff are, everything's nice in the middle. So now, what we're going to want to do is import our raw height map from Course Terrain Tool. And you do that by going back to the settings, to the area where you set your size, and then select the Import Raw button next to your height map resolution. And then if you go and navigate towards your Course Terrain Tool folder, you should see a folder in there called Raw, and in there you should see a raw inner terrain file. Open this up, you'll see this little dialog pop up. Make sure all this is set to depth bit 16. Resolution should be that 4097. Byte orders windows. I'm pretty sure you're going to want to check flip vertically. And then make sure that these numbers are your width, height, and length. Hit import. If things go correctly, you should now see your terrain slightly bumpy. And I can see that it's sort of working because I think I see sort of a sand trap cluster here with a green that would be here. And what we can do to check all of this is import our overlays to our Unity scene. So what I like to do is come back to that Course Terrain Tool folder, click the Overlays folder, and then just drag it into your Unity project, like so. Unity will take a minute to sort of import all those big image files. And what I usually start with is my hillshade. You can start with your terrain as well. It shouldn't matter what you do. But I find the TIFF file of the hillshade, make sure it's selected, and then in the inspector come over and you can pump the resolution all the way up to 8192 and hit apply. And this will make sure it's using the highest resolution available on there. And then click your course terrain, come up here to paint terrain, and what you're going to want to do is go to paint texture in that drop down. You're not going to have any terrain layers yet. It's a new project, so click on this edit terrain layers and create layer. Then you're going to want to select your hillshade. Make sure you select the TIFF, because there's a JPEG in there too, but I like the TIFF as a little higher resolution. And then it's going to show you the hillshade, but like in a repeating tile. So what you're going to want to do is click on that new layer you just created. It should come up with some options here, and then in size you're going to want to match this to your terrain height. In my case that was 2250. Yep. And do that again, 2250. And now my hillshade should be scaled to my terrain, and I should be able to sort of zoom around and see that it kind of looks like the surface of the moon, but it'll show you where the sort of lakes and bunkers and sort of slopes are, and you can zoom around and things should be looking kind of like a golf course on the moon at this point. You can basically repeat the same process with like the Bing or Google Sat. So come up here to the Bing, set the max size to 8192, hit apply. And then I go back to my terrain, and under that terrain layer, make sure you again got paint texture here set, and then click on the terrain layer, and under the diffuse texture just drag the Bing over to there. And now you can see your satellite image rendered right on your terrain, and you can zoom around and see that things are lining up and making sense. It also sometimes helps to turn on shaded wireframe, which will add wireframe lines. It makes it easier to see slope and change in direction and things like that. So this is looking pretty good. Let me know, if you have any issues with this process or if I skipped any parts of it. But this should get you halfway set up in Unity.